right. We're talking more Knights of the Old Republic by John Jackson Miller. We're going to talk Volume 2, Flashpoint, which is issues 7 through 12, although actually Flashpoint is technically 7, 8, and 10. So let's talk about that first, because there's 3 different stories going on in this volume. So, Flashpoint. In the midst of the gang conning the Republic out of food by faking a Mandalorian invasion, they get caught up in an actual Mandalorian invasion, and Jariel is kidnapped and taken to Flashpoint Station. Flashpoint Station is I believe it was a mining base that the Mandalorians took over, and they basically have this guy named Demigol who is experimenting on Jedi. He's trying to figure out how the Force works. We've seen this before, like with Jenna Zan Arbor in the Jedi Apprentice series, where you have these mad scientists that they want to figure out what makes a Jedi special and how midichlorians work, that sort of thing. They're aided by a Mandalorian named Roland Dye, and this is important because he's an interesting character, and I will explain later, but for now, just know that he is a Mandalorian warrior who doesn't quite get what the purpose is with the Mandalorians fighting the Republic now. He keeps deserting because he wants to find a greater purpose, and Mandalore keeps sending him out into the thick of it over and over again anytime he deserts. So he's kind of infamous around the Mandalorians because they think he's being a coward, but really he just doesn't get the point of this war and why they're fighting now. Because you gotta understand, because I haven't talked about Tales of the Jedi. For those of you who don't know, Exar Kun and Eula Keldromo, 2 fallen Jedi, became Dark Lords of the Sith, amassed a Mandalorian army. They got into league with Mandalore, and they tried to just take over the entire galaxy. I've mentioned this before, but just so you know, that happened only a few decades ago here in the timeline. Like, this isn't ancient history, this is recent history. And that's why there's this fear with the Jedi of the Sith returning, because it was a mess. I mean, they lost their temple on Ossus. Like, it got annihilated, and we won't see Jedi coming back there till into Luke's time being in the Jedi. Like, it's gone. It's gone, basically. The Jedi were very damaged afterwards. So, and the Mandalorians also received casualties. They lost their Mandalore, and a new Mandalore ended up taking the mantle. Because unlike it being a dark saber, a light saber, the weapon of the enemy, we have Mandalore's mask dictates who it is Mandalore. Yeah, I don't understand why Dave Filoni decided to just take a dump on Mandalorian lore. I mean, basically at this point, the Mandalorians are so watered down and bizarre that, it's hard to like them. But with this, we get the classic Mandalorian mercenaries. These are warriors. They're just waiting for a war to fight. That is their whole purpose. And right now, their purpose is to conquer Taris, because the Jedi have pulled out. But anyway, that's background stuff. We get Jariel's been captured. Zane and crew are teaming up with this Mandalorian renegade to get Jariel back. Meanwhile, she runs into other Jedi. Specifically, Jedi that will show up later that are very important to the Old Republic storyline. Specifically, a Jedi known simply as Alec, who had been in issue 0. He'd run into Zane before that. But Alec's here being tortured, and he's starting to look more like how he'll look in the future. But basically, Demagol's just vivisecting Jedi and torturing them so he can figure out how they tick. It's very Nazi slash the Japanese army during World War II, and I think that's the point, slash the Inquisition. Because the Mandalorians in the Old Republic, to me, they look like medieval knights. And they have the very beaten up armor, and they look more medieval than their more modern counterparts we see today. And so it's a really creepy, unpleasant storyline with some good jokes. It does balance the humor and the serious nature of the story. Because John Jackson Miller's kind of a genius author and writing stories that, you know, they can be lighthearted and at the same time deal with really dark subject matter. But anyway, I need to talk about issue 9, which is called Homecoming. Well, specifically, it's Flashpoint interlude Homecoming. And this deals with Lucian and the other Jedi Masters that killed the Padawans. And how just their background, and it's Lucian's story, because it was his mother who brought all of these Jedi seers together, because she was a Jedi seer herself. And Lucian is, it explains why he's with them, basically. And it kind of starts to set up his family dynamic, which we'll get into later. But it gives him more depth into why he's so villainous. And then the next, that's basically it. Another thing I want to note with issue 9, this was the first issue of KOTOR I ever read. Back in the day, I didn't know what a comic book store was. I had been in like one once. But I got my comics not from Collectors Inc. or Bat Comics, you know, bookstores I repped in the past. I got my comics from Walden Books. Now, probably most of you don't even remember what Walden Books was. Basically, it's the same thing as Borders, which Borders seemed to last longer than Walden Books did. But there was a Walden Books outlet in the mall that we used to go to. And they had a comic book spinner rack, which had your Marvel and your DC, and it had Dark Horse stuff. Because I remember there being Hellboy, and Conan the Barbarian, and Star Wars. And initially, I jumped onto the very last couple issues of Star Wars Tales. Convinced my mom this was a good thing to buy. Which, Tales was expensive back in the day. It was like $4.99 or something like that an issue, because they were big issues. But I ended up picking this up, and I think at this point I was already reading Legacy, which I picked up issue 2 of. I'm infamous for missing issue 1. I mean, we didn't use the internet a lot when this series came out, like this time. Like, the personal computer in my house was a new thing. My parents refused to get a computer till late 2006. It was either it was late 2005. They finally got a computer, and my sister and I were barely allowed to use it for a long time. And then I just started using it whenever I felt like, when they weren't home, which that's a story in and of itself. But, yeah, back in the day, I didn't know what Star Wars comics were coming out, like what was going on, and I was picking up the trade paperback volumes of Clone Wars. Because I remember picking up an issue of Star Wars Republic, you know, and like I fell in love with it, but I never saw them again, and so I picked up the volumes. Well, with KOTOR, I picked up issue 9, which was a self-contained story, and I said, well, this is weird. I really like this. And then I ended up picking up Flashpoint Part 3. And, like, I didn't know what was going on, but I really liked the characters in it. I just kept on, and I ended up picking up the first 2 volumes. And then I picked up the singles and the trades for a while. And then our Walden Books went out of business, and I just had to start picking up the trades. I would special order them from Barnes & Noble, because this was back in the day when Barnes & Noble didn't have a huge comic book selection like they do now, or even more their manga section. Like, it was nothing. You could get it from them, but you had to special order it. And so I witnessed, like, Civil War that way, like Marvel's Civil War. Saw that come out in the trades, like those sort of things. Like, I remember all that stuff, but I never really read it till much later. But I cared about Star Wars, and it's how I read Star Wars for a long time. Just collecting the individual trades. That's why I'm reviewing these this way, because this is how they were originally collected. But we need to get into issues 11 and 12, which is Reunion. Basically, they're trying to get Griff's money. It's trapped on this bank world, and Jariel and Camper are pretending to be rich people to steal Griff's money, even though Griff could withdraw his money in theory, but he doesn't trust that the Republic won't find him. So these 2 Ithorian bounty hunters show up, and they kidnap the banker. Well, the banker happens to be Zane's father. So yes, we get a family reunion of sorts with Zane and his father as they try to rescue his father. So overall, like, it's a fun 2-issue story. It's a bit lighthearted compared to the previous subject matter, and it makes a nice break before we get into more moodier stuff going forward. So overall, what do I think of Flashpoint? I really like the whole thing. I like that it's 3 different stories, and they flow well together, and it's nice to read. It's nice to read this. It's such a character-driven story, and I really, really like it. And once again, I gotta give it a 5 out of 5. It's well worth your time to check out.